Alrighty, welcome back, boys and girls. It's your main math man, Mr. Shank, coming to you live from Walker Graham Middle School. And in this video, we're still working on that SOL review guide, and now we're working on that 8.3. So we're talking about those square roots, and we're also talking about those perfect squares. So two things with this: you're talking about those two consecutive integers. So that means back to back. So anytime you see that word consecutive, just think back to back. And then the other part is just the positive and negative square roots of a given perfect square. That one's super simple, but we'll always double check our work. Excuse me. All right, so for this, make sure that you can see the things to know, hints and tricks, and using that Desmos as well, as it is super helpful. Also be familiar with that number line. So when you are working with those square roots, you're saying, okay, what integers does a square root fall between? Another way to think about it is this: you're saying, okay, I have that this is 0 squared, this is 1 squared, and then we could say something like this. We could say, or actually let's do this. Let's say square root of 0, square root of 1, square root of 4, square root of 9, square root of 16, square root of 25, so on and so forth. That way you can think, okay, if it goes between those two, it's that consecutive integer. All right, so for number 1, it says look at the sequence of numbers. Which number could not replace the missing value? So we're looking for the one that cannot go there. So let's see. It says we need a number that's between 10.5 and 11.9. So when we are doing this, you can use that Desmos calculator. We can say, all right, square root of 123. This is equal to 11.09, which that would work out, so it's not what we're looking for. What about the square root of 139? This is about 11.78. That does go between those two numbers, so we're still fine. What about square root of 133? Same kind of setup. It is okay. However, for that last one, it should be our answer, but we can always double check. We can say square root of 147. It's going to be 12.2, which is not between those two, so that's why it is false. So then for number 2, it says look at the number line. Which point best represents the square root of 247? So when you're looking for those, integers that goes between, you can always just use that calculator, but I can also do this. So let me show you both ways. Again, you can just say, all right, square root of 247, and so this is going to be about at 15.71. So that's going to be between 16 and 15. However, what I can also do is this. If I have my list of perfect squares, I know that I can move it around and say, okay, I know that my 247 goes in between these two perfect squares, which when I take the square root is just going to be 15 and 16. So I need to say, okay, it needs to go between 15 and 16, which is B for that one. So now for number 3, it says select all correct answers, which has, so let's say has a value between 12 and 13. So what has a square, well, we can say a square root is the same as the square root of 144, and we can say this is the square root of 169. So if that value that is underneath that radical symbol or that square root symbol, if that's just very simply between 144 and 169, we know we're good. You can also do those calculated values as well, but I like to save some time. So is 133 between 144 and 169? It is not. However, 149 is, 151 is, 177 is not, 169 is on 13. However, it says between, so we're not going to select that one. However, 163 is good. Same deal with those two, and we definitely know that one is false. So again, be very careful when you are choosing those values. Then it says for number 4, between which two consecutive whole numbers, meaning positive, does the square root of 19 go between? Well, let's figure this out. Let's talk about the square root of 19. So when we're looking at this, we can say, all right, I know that 19, the square root of 19 is between these two square roots of perfect squares. And so what two numbers does that go between? That goes between 4 and 5. So we're going to say for this one, 4 and 5. Moving on to number 5. It says identify the two consecutive whole numbers between which the square root of 251 lies. Again, whole numbers, positive numbers on that number line. And say, okay, what do we have for 251? Well, let's use that calculator, stay fresh with it. 251. So that's going to say this is about 15.8. Again, be careful when you're saying, okay, where would that go between on the number line? Well, I have 15 and 16, and so it would be in between those two. So again, it would be between 15 and 16. Again, they have to be two consecutive numbers, meaning they are back to back. Make sure you're not skipping around or saying, any gap. It has to be one after the other. Then it says for number 6, if a squared is equal to 144, which of the following is true? So this is gonna have for A, that one's actually totally fine because we know that, hey, since it is a perfect square, we know this. We could say 12, or let's say since 12 squared is equal to 12 times 12, which is 144, and negative 12 squared is negative 12 times itself. That's also 144. We know that this is going to be our answer. Again, make sure you are seeing those for yourself. It says, what is the negative square root of 1? Well, square root of 1 is 1. Take the opposite of it, it's going to be negative 1. And you can also type it in as it looks. So we have negative square root 1 is going to be equal to negative 1. For number 8, it says you must select all correct answer. If W is equal to if W squared is 196, then what is W? Again, you can also just take the square root of both sides. And so you could say, well, square root of 196 is gonna be 14, but we also have to remember we have that negative if we need it. So we have 14, and we could say we have negative 14. For number 9, it says look at the sequence of numbers. And then it has which number could replace the missing value. So we're looking in between 18.1 and 20.3. So what value could go between that? Well, let's find out. We have a square root of 413. That's too much. 20.3. Is that too far? Yes, it is, because we have 28.32, which is past that amount. So we can't do that one. What about 303? About square root 303. It's about 17, which is not past that one, so we can't choose that. About square root of 331. 18.19. So there we go. 18.19 is good because it can go in that space. For number 10, it says identify the two consecutive integers between which the value of the negative square root of 179 or 197 goes between. So again, make sure you can have that negative on the outside. Negative square root of 197. That's going to be about negative 14.03. So again, that's two consecutive integers. So what are those two? Well, if I'm thinking on the number line, it would go in between negative 15 and negative 14. Again, always make sure you're thinking on a number line for yourself when you are trying to think of those consecutive numbers. And then for number 11, it says the square root of 57 falls between which two consecutive whole numbers. And make sure you can also do it like this. I can say, all right, it's talking about what's two perfect squares that go between, or that goes around 57. We have, what was that, 64 and 49. Take the square root of each. 57 and square root of 64. So we could say the square root of 57 goes between 7 and 8. 7 and 8. And then for that last one, I'll use the calculator. It says square root negative square root of 333 is going to go between negative 19 and negative 18.